Premier Scott Moe had asked the Prime Minister to improve trade relations with China, and this week Moe was seated next to Mark Carney in Beijing. So what comes out of those meetings? Well, we found out this morning with the EV and canola news, as you just heard with John Northcott. What's happening with safety in Saskatchewan hospitals? That's another big headline from this week. Our political panel is here to break down the week's big stories. Murray Mandryk is a political columnist, and our provincial affairs reporter at CBC is Alexander Quon. Alex, to start with you and China, what are the details when it comes to China and Canada and how this is going to impact Saskatchewan?
Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney, when he made and announced this trip, he said it was with the aim of recalibrating trade with China, recalibrating the relationship with China, and that is definitely what has emerged this morning. As of this morning, it was announced that by March 1st, China is expected to lower canola pea tariffs specifically, to a combined 15%. And then as of March 1st, no tariffs on canola meal, lobsters, crabs, or peas until at least the end of this year. In exchange, Canada will allow up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the country at a favored nation rate, which is 6.1%. Essentially, this resets a lot of this to what it was pre-tariffs disagreement between China and Canada.
And Murray, the premier's over there, fairly significant, seems the Prime Minister hasn't had a trip to since 2017. Let's get your reaction first to the deal between Canada and China. What do you think of this?
Well, I would go beyond fairly significant to something that's actually potentially game-changing for Scott Moe and potentially historic. And I don't think I'm overstating things. For my own edification of late, I've been reading a lot about the history of this place that goes back even before I was around. And the stuff that is involving any relationship between Ottawa and Saskatchewan, particularly when there's a federal Liberal government involved, Saskatchewan always loses. You can go back to the NEP. You can go back to the potash royalties and the taxes of the day. Any kind of investment in Saskatchewan always favored Ottawa, always favored Eastern Canada. This is real. This is the long-standing frustration that gets into the whole issue of why there's Western alienation, why there's talk of separation. As such, it all has to do with the fact that we'd never have a situation like we saw the other day, or today, where we have Scott Moe sitting beside the Prime Minister of Canada announcing a deal that's favorable to Saskatchewan over Ottawa. It's a good deal in my mind, and objectively speaking, I think it's far more significant to have a strong canola industry and not have these massive tariffs on a product that we're actually moving, selling, rather than having this issue related to the tax on EVs that isn't really a real issue. It's a new industry, but if you look at manufacturing in Ottawa or in Eastern Canada and Ottawa's approach to it, I don't think it's significant. You're right. Obviously, Ontario and Eastern Canada is going to have its nose out of joint. It's so used to getting its own way by its own might. But I honestly believe that the right decision was made here in a difficult situation. And this is fantastic for Scott Moe. I don't know long-term how it's going to work for him because he's a conservative. I imagine Pierre Poilievre can't be particularly happy seeing Scott Moe sit beside Mark Carney and offer him support to a deal that's going to have a fair bit of controversy. Fantastic political move by Mark Carney to have a Western premier beside him and show that there's unity in the nation. But it's also a pretty good move for Scott Moe because he's doing something productive. That doesn't happen on these trade trips. We've been critical of these trips to United Arab Emirates or India that produce nothing. Jeremy Harrison loves to travel for no apparent reason. this is one particular trip that's fantastic for Scott Moe because of the result it's produced. How much he had to do with it, I'm not 100% sure. But let's just judge it strictly on the outcome. And as of now, objectively speaking, this is a fantastic outcome for Scott Moe.
I mentioned another topic that's come up this week, and we heard on the news as well the memorial service for Trevor Dubois, who died after a altercation at RUH last week. That's the official statement. This has brought up again, Alex, questions about hospital safety from many different groups. What can you tell us about this?
So here's what we know at this moment. Trevor Dubois was a 36-year-old man who grew up Métis, but was recently a member of the Musqueam First Nation. He was recently diagnosed with brain cancer and was receiving treatment at the Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon. Last Friday, security was called to his room over reports of a gun being spotted. Some kind of fight or altercation occurred. We don't know the details. Those details haven't been released to the public. They haven't been released to his family either. Dubois was restrained. He became unresponsive and was later pronounced dead. Now, police say they found an imitation firearm, methamphetamine, and drug paraphernalia after the incident. Trevor's family have said they believe police's description of a imitation firearm matches what they believe is a bright pink and yellow cigarette holder / lighter. So that is a new detail that has emerged recently. The government has remained relatively quiet, other than Health Minister Jeremy Cockrell offering his condolences. The SHA has promised an external investigation, and obviously this Saskatoon Police Service are also investigating this incident. The NDP launched a PR blitz of their own around hospital safety for both patients and staff. That was a move not welcomed by Trevor's family and Indigenous officials, including with the Saskatoon Tribal Council, who condemned the NDP for politicizing Dubois' death.
Now, Murray, one of the things the NDP had brought up was a psychiatric nurse from St. Paul's who came out and said staff had been spit on, bit and hit, been threatened with weapons by patients. First, just reacting to the reaction from the family, being critical of the NDP coming out after this. What are your thoughts on that?
My heart goes out to the family. My heart goes out to the victim. My heart goes out to the people in hospitals that have to endure all this, which is exactly why we need a thorough investigation to get to the bottom of this and not leap to conclusions as seems to be happening. The NDP were completely wrong-headed in even talking about this at this particular time, in my mind. Sometimes less is more in opposition politics. You don't need to have an opinion on every particular issue. That's the luxury of being in opposition, because you can sort of avoid the traps, the things to step in, which I think they actually did in this particular case. Let the issue play out through an investigation, because only through an investigation can we develop the understanding that I think that we need to develop, that we don't have right now, in terms of what it's like working in hospitals. They have an absolute perfect case as hospital workers about how tough the job is, how dangerous it is, and how difficult it is. But we don't know the circumstances of someone who has brain cancer, who might not be reacting normally to a situation, who might have other issues in play that need to be explored, because only through exploration of these issues do we develop that full understanding of what working conditions are like for these people and what they're honestly like for the patients involved, which is as critical. I'm sure hospital workers are incredibly sympathetic to these people that are in distress, that are in difficult situations. So let's all sit back and take a breath on this one. Let's not have an opposition reaction. Obviously not a very good week for the opposition, because between this and the canola, they have issues that they want to react to and probably can't and effectively, and choose to react to issues like this, that maybe it would be better if they just didn't. And maybe it would be better if we found out what was going on before anybody reacted.
And we haven't had you guys on in a couple of weeks, and something that came up recently was both SGI and Sask Power, Alex, applying for rate increases. What's the latest on this?
Yeah, Sask Power has applied for a 4% rate increase in 2026 and 2027. SGI is proposing its own rate increase of 3.75% in 2026 and in 2027. Both of these are up for the rate review board, so we'll see if these actually get passed. The NDP, which are focused on affordability, and they have called for a special session to debate affordability issues as well as this proposed rate increases. That was immediately shut down by the provincial government, who didn't want to have that happen. I will note something that I found interesting in the Sask Power application. Moe, of course, has repeatedly touted Saskatchewan as the country's first carbon tax-free province. You'll remember that the consumer carbon tax was removed in April of last year, and at that same time, Scott Moe said he'd remove the industrial carbon tax, which is the carbon tax on heavy emitters. He would remove that from the Sask Power bills of individuals in this province. The application actually makes it clear that although the industrial carbon tax doesn't appear on your Sask Power bill, the province is still paying for it. In fact, in this upcoming fiscal year, its obligations under this industrial carbon tax are going to total $368 million. And one way or the other, through various programs, the provincial government is going to pay Sask Power for it.
And Murray, what do you make of that and these proposed rate increases?
There's nothing more irritating than governments that giveth with one hand and taketh with the other, which is exactly what's happening with the Sask Power rates, and I would argue SGI. With the Sask Power rates, we've actually benefited from the notion of not having the industrial carbon tax paid by the consumer, paid by the government. You can't make that up, though, in terms of the revenue shortfall that we're now sued, although this would not be revenue that would have went to the taxpayers, by suddenly increasing rates and increasing them at a time that just happens to be convenient to the political cycle where there's no election coming, which is also the problem with SGI. You might remember the rebates that we were getting a few years ago. Well, guess what's happening now? Rates are increasing because guess why? Well, there's not an election in the offing right now. We're not seeing one till 2028, so now is a great time for governments to go forward with this. I don't know if we need a special session for the legislature to deal with this, but we need to deal with this in the legislature. This is a great issue for the opposition, and they are on top of it, raising this particular concern. The reality in terms of the cost of living is that this just might be the reality. The cost of living is going up, and that we have to find ways to better deal with it, particularly when we have crown corporations. But I think a thorough explanation and exploration is what's needed. You may remember that Jeremy Harrison dashed off to Saskatoon last July and basically decided that here's a great day to release every annual report and not have any serious questions from media and elsewhere about the cost of these things in a world where there seems to be less media scrutiny, less scrutiny general about these issues. Well, you know what? We need more scrutiny, and here's why. Because we're being hit with rates right now, and it kind of relates to things that were happening for a significant time related to the budgets of these crown corporations, related to them losing money, related to their debt load. We need better exploration for this, and we need better accountability and responsibility from government on the crown corporation file. We're not getting that.
Murray, Alex, thanks so much.
You're very welcome.